Welcome to the Stand By Us Conference 2020.
We're talking all about multi-gender attraction at the intersections.
Hello from Wajak Noongar land, Perth.
Sharing big bi plus pride from Wurundjeri land, Naarm, Melbourne.
Hi from Ghana land, Adelaide.
A big kia ora and hello from Te Wanganui, Atara, Wellington.
Broadcasting wholesome bi plus vibes from Orang, Sydney.
Well, from Meanjin, Brisbane.
And hello to you wherever you are around the globe.
We are so privileged to live in this part of the world. We recognise the strength and resilience of the First Nations peoples who maintain a continuing connection to these beautiful lands and waters, a right and responsibility that was stolen from them and never ceded. We acknowledge the traditional caretakers of each of the nations throughout Australia and New Zealand that we now share, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. We would also like to acknowledge any First Nations peoples that are joining us today.
Here at the Stand By Us conference, we are celebrating bi plus people, elevating bi plus voices and bringing together our amazing community.
We care a lot about your well-being, so making this conference as accessible as we can from a mental health perspective. We don't expect that any session will be traumatic or overwhelming. Mostly there will be conversations, opportunities to connect and some performances.
Some topics might be uncomfortable, including talking about biphobia, mental illness and various things our community experiences. You know yourself and your boundaries best, so we'd like to empower you to look after yourself and trust your gut on whether it is the right time for you to be engaged in certain topics.
If you find yourself upset or overwhelmed, we strongly encourage you to make use of your own coping tools like breathing, grounding, comfort items or food. You might also try talking to someone close, like a family member or a friend, or to a crisis line like Q-Life, Lifeline, or Kids Helpline.
We hope that connecting to the Bi Plus community online will be a mixture of fun, healing, interesting, and illuminating for you, and an opportunity to engage or re-engage with the greater LGBTQIA+ communities of Australia. You're not alone, and we're delighted to have you with us.
And we hope you enjoy the conference.
Bye bye.
Great. So before we get started on the conference proceedings, it's our great honour to introduce Dr Vanessa Lee, one of the co-conveners of ILGA Oceania, to do an acknowledgement of country across Australia and New Zealand.
Thanks, Misty. Debedim, everyone. Awaswa, mayam kake Vanessa. Awaswa. And it gives me great pleasure to acknowledge you all this afternoon. So what I just said in my own language, which was Miriam, is that I welcome you and I acknowledge and I thank you for allowing me to speak at your conference this afternoon. My name is Vanessa. I identify as she and her. My people are from Yupungathi and Miriam, right up in Cape York and the Torres Strait. When we do an acknowledgement to country, it's an opportunity to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional owners and ongoing custodians of the land of which we all sit upon today, nationally and internationally. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people never ceded the land, and acknowledgements are often made at the commencement of an event, as a meeting or a speech. So for this event, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the countries that we all sit upon throughout Australia and across the road, and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. Pay my respect to the elders past, present and emerging. I'm currently on the land of the Wangal people of the Eora Nation. The Eora Nation is the first part of Sydney where colonisation happened. And when colonisation happened in Australia, at this first point of port of call, which makes Sydney the oldest place colonised within Australia. and nobody really thinks about that. So when you start thinking about that and start understanding the way that culture and traditional ways of doing, knowing and being need to be integrated and implemented with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, I think it comes to that intersectionality of knowing who we are in identity and knowing who we are in culture, so that we don't lose who we are as a nation of people. And I am very honoured and to be invited to talk to at your Stand By conference. I think I said that right. I apologise. And can I just share that someone said to me recently? They said, it was a guy I know, and he said, Vanessa, we all started out as bi. And I said, did we? And he said, well, you think about it. And I went, oh yeah, okay. Perhaps we all did. And I said, and then we just sort of made a choice, and some of us went, okay, you know what, I'm happy with who I am, and that's okay. And he said, yes. And then he said to me, so I've decided that I'm gender fluid. And I said, you're 70. And he said, yes, and I can be gender fluid. And I said, what is that at 70? And he said, that's exactly who I am at 70. And I went, okay, that's great. I'm glad. I'm still going to be Vanessa in all of this. And I said, because in our culture, we don't have the LGBTIQ identification at all. People just are. The labels actually came with colonisation. And it wasn't an issue who you had sex with. That was your private life. And as long as you abide by the culture and follow the culture, your sexuality is your choice. So in saying that, I think that it's really important for us to understand that this is who we are and where we stand as a people, as a nation, and that we shouldn't be judging and we shouldn't be making people feel isolated or alone just because of who they are going to love, or who they do love, or who they are sexually, or how they identify in their gender. And coming from a culture where I was raised like that with my grandmother, with that acceptance of who I am, really made me feel comfortable and safe. And, one of my cousins said to me yesterday, she said, you're really comfortable with yourself. She said, you just were. And I said, well, why couldn't you tell me that a long time ago that I just was? It would have been lovely. And she said, well, we just thought you knew. And I was like, well, no, I didn't. I didn't know, but now I do. And I'm really comfortable and safe with it. And she said, you're just so comfortable with it. And she said, you always have been. And she said, I remember you turning up with a guy one day, and I thought she was a lesbian. And I thought I was a lesbian too. And I said, I'm so glad I clarified it. And I think so. I'm just sharing that with you guys. And I really do hope you have a good conference. And the reason I was sharing that was because it's important to be comfortable in your skin with who you are, with whatever you want to be. And just, my grandmother used to say to me, Vanessa, as long as you're happy, make sure the person does not abuse you, and just make sure you're happy. And that's all I can say to you all. Make sure you're happy. And I thank you again. And I do acknowledge the traditional owners of this land and all of your lands as well. Thank you. Awaswa.
Thank you so much, Vanessa, for that beautiful acknowledgement. We're very grateful for you doing that, and understand that you weren't able to do a welcome to country because we are broadcasting across Australia and New Zealand, but thank you for acknowledging it as an Indigenous person.
Misty, can I just say I can't do a welcome because this is not my country. My people are from Yupangathi and Miriam, Cape York and the Torres Strait, and I'm on the Wongal land of the Eora Nation in Sydney. So that's also another reason.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thanks for that. Right, let's get cracking with the conference. Welcome to everyone who's here. My name is Misty Farquhar and I use they, them pronouns. Anthony, you're on mute.
Great. And I'm Anthony Leckis, he, him pronouns. Thank you, Vanessa.
Bi activism has emerged like never before across Australia and New Zealand in the last couple of years. This has meant that Bi+ people have organised in both formal and informal groups to respond to the specific and unique issues that face Bi+ people and impact their mental health and well-being. We know that because of biphobia, being erased and excluded, Bi+ people often feel disconnected and unsafe to attend community spaces freely and openly.
The Bi Plus collective who present this forum to you all was established to enhance a sense of community for Bi Plus people beyond the borders of our respective states, especially during such hard times during COVID-19. So it's with much delight that we present this to you all, the Stand By Us 2020 conference. We've so much to offer each other and to learn from each other. So we want this conference to provide you all with information, experiences, and resources to empower yourself as a Bi Plus person or to gain valuable insights as an ally.
And to help us launch the conference today, we have a special guest, Commissioner Ro Allen from the Victorian Government.
Thank you, Misty, and thank you, Anthony. And thank you, Vanessa, for that fantastic acknowledgement of country. I'm coming to you from the land of the Yorta Yorta, and I want to pay my respects to First Nations people and elders past and present, any First Nations people that are with us today at the conference. I'm really honoured to be here for two reasons. The first is because Misty said you're still the only commissioner in Australia and New Zealand, so that's an honour in itself. And a bit of a poke to my friends across the ocean there. You're a very progressive country, New Zealand. Why don't you have a commissioner for LGBTIQ+? Get on with that. And the other one, the other reason I'm really honoured is that I'm a really boring monosexual person. And so to be here as an ally to stand with you is really important to me. And I just want to thank you for putting this conference together and acknowledge also the trailblazers and elders within the Bi Plus community. And I think there's some maybe original conference attendees that are here that went to the first conference 28 years ago, and some people that might be coming along for the very first time that are realizing that they are bisexual. And that would be a really exciting time for you as well. As Commissioner for LGBTIQ, I think that there's times for the whole alphabet to be together and to strive forward and overcome inequalities. But I also very, very importantly believe that there's times and spaces, and there should be places for every letter of the alphabet to do their own personal work, to have their own spaces to talk about the unique issues for that letter of the alphabet. Now, you know, I always say it's not an oppression Olympics, and you know that, but you have particular issues that we know statistically are more prominent within the Bi Plus or multi-gender attracted community, and Misty and Anthony have outlined some of those. I'm very excited to tell you today that we've just released, and you can find it on my Facebook page, the Victorian population health data. Now this, I'm not usually, people know me, I'm not usually a data nerd at all, but this data is so critical because it's general population. It's not one of our LGBTIQ surveys, it's general population survey. And it's found that 5.7% of Victorians are LGBTIQ, and I can proudly tell you that you make up 2.8% of that. And that leaves 1.8% as the G and the L. Now you can wave that flag pretty high. So you're 2.8, you're a whole point above the L and G. And if you add the people that preferred not to say or didn't actually tick they were heterosexual, it would be a lot more. And why is that data important? And it's probably something that you've all known yourselves. We can now start to advocate for the issues around Bi Plus people a lot more in Victoria. And of course, if that's in Victoria, I'm sure it's in every other state of Australia, and I'm sure you could argue it in New Zealand as well. So I've learned a lot in my 5 years as Commissioner around all the alphabet, but I've been really blessed to be able to spend time with a number of bisexual groups in Victoria that have taught me a lot of things. And one of the things that Anthony, I think I'm going to give this one to Anthony, taught me was a sort of analogy about so many people come through the B in the alphabet. They move through the B, but they rub their dirty feet on the carpet and they slam their door on the way out. Yep, he's smiling, so it must have been him. And, you know, really, we don't care. We were very welcoming, he said. We're very welcoming in the B in the alphabet, as long as you treat it well, and don't slam the door on the way out. And I think that's a great analogy. I think that the L and the G need to step up and be much better allies than they have been, me included, for the B. And that's really, really important. I wish you all so very best in this conference. I look forward to what you can give me and what you can teach us in the broader LGBTIQ population and in the advocacy space to know when we can stand by you. In Victoria, we've done a few things. It's not enough. I've been able to elevate a bisexual woman to be the co-chair of the task force in Victoria, which is a prominent position, Jade DeBont, and also been able to fund the first year of a Bi-5 funding, which is given the two groups in Victoria the opportunity to come up with an audit tool for mainstream as well as LGBTIQ organisations in Victoria to put a bi plus or multi-gender attracted lens over the services we deliver. And I think that that audit tool is going to come up with, well, you'll know because you access these services, but there's lots of gaps and lots of work we need to do. And I think that tool being launched soon and being put out into not only Victorian services, but hopefully we can share that audit tool, that Bi-5 tool, more broadly. So there's a lot more work to do. I hope you have a fantastic conference. For those who are just on the fringes, coming into our community, coming into the B letter, welcome. I hope you have a fantastic time. Congratulations to the organisers. I'm so glad you've got that I'm on mute already out of the way, Anthony. And you're the first person to wear that badge. It's usually me. I'm the Commissioner for LGBTIQ, not the Commissioner for Comms and Tech, which my team are finding out, but look at that. I'm even here. I've ironed, this is actually not even a backdrop. This is a real flag I've ironed up because I don't know how to do one of those techo backdrop. But anyway, I know you'll have a wonderful time and I look forward to any outcomes, and I commit again to stand by you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ro. We've had some comments from some of you in the audience tearing up at some of the things that you've said. It does mean a lot to be acknowledged in such a public way by such an important person in an important role. So the reason we're all here today is that Duke Dow and I, both from Bi+ Community Perth, had the great pleasure of chatting to Shiri Eisner earlier this week. Shiri is an activist and writer living in Tel Aviv, Israel, or occupied Palestine. Her identities include Mizrahi, bisexual, genderqueer, polyamorous, feminist, disabled, chronically ill, vegan, geek, and crazy cat lady. She is also the author of the Lambda-nominated book, Bi, Notes for a Bisexual Revolution. And this is a book that many of us read as baby bisexuals. We had questions for Shiri from folks around the region, which we asked her, as well as some of our own. But we started by asking what makes bisexuality so challenging and radical.
So I think there are a lot of components that make bisexuality a threat and a challenge to mainstream society and dominant power structures. I think probably the most prominent one would be binaries, especially the sex, gender, orientation binary, because bisexuality challenges those at each of their axes. So for example, the original definition for bisexuality used to be intersexuality. And in biology to this day, when it comes to plants and some animals, bisexuality is still being used in that meaning. So, you know, from the very outset, sorry, of the conception of this word, it was, you know, it served as a reminder for the falseness of constructed social binaries. So this one would be sex. When we're talking about gender, I think that can connect a lot to the orientation axis, because, you know, the ability to be, to feel attraction, romantic and or sexual to people of more than one gender. You know, the part about gender emphasizes the fact that there are more than two and that these don't necessarily correspond to either sex or orientation. And of course, orientation being the classic, you know, gay, straight binary that is disrupted by bisexuality and its existence. And also, you know, there are a lot of other things which, you know, like I wrote about in my book, there are the stereotypes that really reflect the way bisexuality can pose a threat to a lot of, you know, dominant beliefs or rules, as it were. So, for example, the stereotype about not being able to be faithful would be a threat to monogamy, or the stereotype about not being able to choose between gay or straight would be a threat to the requirement to belong to either one of the categories. And of course, these categories are all used as tools of oppression to separate between groups of people, so that you know, to be able to give power and control to one of those groups and to oppress the other. So categories or groups used as tools to maintain heteropatriarchal order. So bisexuality, in a way, undermines a lot of these things in a way that is very worth both looking at and practicing. And those are a lot of the points that I like to lean on in my own bisexual politics. So, you know, for example, if we get like the respectability politics type of myth busting of like, you know, no, we're not sluts, or no, we have decided we belong to this or that category, we can be monogamous. I think it's a mistake to capitulate to those values, and that it's our the bisexuality gives us a really unique and amazing opportunity to serve as something, you know, to the contrary, and to use bisexuality to take those apart.
Yeah, what I love is the radical nature of bisexuality as you discussed in your book. So you've hinted about that there with your politics. So you mentioned in the book that you've done activism in a number of areas, but haven't considered bi-plus activism until at a certain point. Can you tell us a bit more about your journey to bi-plus activism and what other activism you do as well?
Mm-hmm. So I think I started going to demonstrations in probably around 2004. I was 22, 21. And I started with the left-wing anti-occupation Palestine solidarity movement here. So I used to get to demonstrations against, you know, various acts of the IDF against the Palestinians, or, you know, demonstrations, liberal Zionist demonstrations for peace, which now I very much oppose, because, you know, peace being a normalization of colonization. That's where I started out. The first demonstration I organized was, I think, in 2005. It was a tiny feminist demonstration in front of the district courthouse of Tel Aviv, against the very underwhelming punishment enacted against trade in women. That was the first thing I organized, and my real, like, political activist awakening, as it were, was in 2006. which was a very seminal year for many of us. There was anarchist conference by the name of Queer Option, Queer Anarchist. And right at the same time when the conference was going on, the Second Lebanon War started. This is a war in which Israel brutally attacked the south of Lebanon, killing many civilians. It went on for quite a while. So for about like a month or 2 months, we were getting into demonstrations pretty much every week. I marched with the Pink Black Bloc, which was the bloc formed by Queer Option. And this is where I really started developing my organizing abilities. Like a really important thing that happened that year was in the summer of the same year, 2006. The Jerusalem Pride Parade was canceled, and in response, me and a few friends organized an illegal parade. We all got arrested before we even went out on the march. Just like we were about 30 or 40 people all hauled into the police station. So that was a major thing that happened. Then 2007 was where I got to bisexual organizing more, and at that point I'd been active for quite a few years, and like me and my friends who were also bisexual kept talking about, and we were part of the queer anarchist movement and community, kept talking about how much we wanted there to be bisexual community activism and discourse. And you know, we were talking about the bisexual erasure in the queer community, and radical queer movement, but it never occurred to me at the time that these two things could connect, that I could like use my ability and knowledge as the political organizer to form a bisexual community, which is something we wanted so much to happen. And then like it came first slowly and then very, very quickly. So in 2007, Tel Aviv's first municipal gay community center was founded, and one of the first things they did at the community center, which was it surprises me to this day that this was one of the first things, because bi erasure was so prevalent back then, like way more than now. One of the first things they did was to create a bisexual support group. And that was like my first dab, as it were, into bisexual organizing, because once I joined the group, and the group wasn't political at all, it was just like a support group. But once I got in there, I wanted to make it more radical. So I tried to get more people to come. I printed out flyers, which I designed, I think, through PowerPoint or something. I gave them out, left them distributed around places. It didn't really work in drawing more people to the group, but it was my first active activism. And then it started rolling from there, because once I started doing that, I saw it was an option, and the gay community center was brand new. They had many days and slots open. So I started my own group. It was a bisexual film club. And we used to meet every week. That one was a little bit more radical because I was behind it. Then that summer, 2008, I think, we wanted to form a block at the Pride Parade. Do you call it a block? Do you call it a contingent? I don't remember. Anyway, everyone marches in the parade here. I don't know how it is in Australia. I know that in the US there are like people who march and people who watch. Anyway, we wanted a bi block, and but the Gay Center, which was organizing the parade, told us that we wouldn't be able to have a stand, like a table in the beginning, unless we were an organization. We wanted them to print a banner for us, and they wanted a logo. And that's where Panorama, my organization, was founded on a technical need. This was the second bisexual organization established in Israel. The previous one having disbanded just only like a year beforehand. And, you know, from the moment that Panorama was founded, everything started coming together more because more people came, more people were involved in activities. And, you know, from there on out, bisexuality became my main activist field.
That's incredible, and it's very similar to what happened with Duke and I with Bi Plus Community Perth. You know, we formed a logo really from the need for a banner, and it grew from there as it often does. And it's interesting, you know, you're talking about the war in Lebanon and a lot of things that perhaps folk in Australia and New Zealand really were unaware of or less aware of. Even though we have Indigenous cultures in our lands, or, you know, the traditional custodians of the lands, we do think of ourselves as very Western places. So what are the most important cultural considerations, do you think, when thinking about bisexuality in what you call majority cultures or non-Western cultures?
So I certainly can't speak for all cultures because I'm not informed about all of them, but from my own place as a brown person, as a Mizrahi person, I think we have a lot of potential for a need for decolonization in a way that intersects with bisexuality. So, for example, in countries like Iraq, which is where my maternal family comes from, and other places which were colonized by European countries, we know from history that the European countries are actually the ones who enacted laws against homosexuality and created the cultural standard of LGBT phobia. For example, when I was studying in my first degree, it was a BA in interdisciplinary art studies. One of my courses was Introduction to Islamic Art. One of the things that the professor showed us was a poem written in, I think, 13th century Iraq, which was, you know, in Europe, the 13th century is called the Middle Ages, and is considered a very backward period. While in Arabic countries and Middle Eastern cultures, the 13th century, the same period, was considered as a rise in culture, like a sort of a renaissance. It's called the Golden Age. So that poem, which my professor read to us from that golden age, described bisexuality in both men and women. And it was a poem, you know, describing the ideal woman and her beauty, and you know, and the desires of the poet. And that woman was bisexual, and the speaker in the poem was bisexual. So I think we have like a lot of unlearning to do, of, you know, of colonizing cultures. I'll give you another example, specifically in Israel or occupied Palestine. The Zionist discourse has changed over the decades. So most of your viewers probably wouldn't be aware of it, but Israel is a very, very young country. I think it's in its 70s. It was only founded in 48. So we can only talk about several decades of discourse. But like in the period before the foundation of the Zionist state, the discourse around like homosexuality and bisexuality in this area leaned towards LGBT phobia in a way that depicted the Palestinians, the indigenous people of the area, as more homosexual and bisexual, whereas the Zionists, the Europeans, were depicted as heterosexual. So, you know, it was part of an Orientalist perception of the East as being more homosexual than the West, because those were the standards of the period for being cultured. Whereas now discourse has moved like to the other end, whereas while cultural standards for what does cultured mean have changed. So now the Palestinians are depicted as more homophobic and LGBT phobic. So many times when Zionist Jews would want to like insult non-Zionist Jewish LGBT people, they would say something like, you know, go to Gaza and see how they treat you there, or something like that. So, you know, I think there is a world we don't know within colonized cultures, and there's a lot to learn from the past, things that current culture has been hiding from us. And I think this is relevant to a lot of colonized cultures. So that is, you know, the potential that bisexuality holds for non-Western cultures, as it were.
Yeah, in your book you talk about race-critical bisexual politics, or bi-aware and anti-racist politics. And then you also talk about the intersectionality between bisexuality and Mizrahiness. Perhaps if you can talk a bit more about that for audience members who are not familiar with these topics.
Could you narrow that down?
Would you like to talk a bit more about politics and intersectionality with bisexuality? Is that too broad even? Or
that's broader.
All right. Could you talk about the relationship between bisexuality and Mizrahiness, as you've discussed in your book?
So I think I just said a lot of those things, but I can expand on it. I am not sure, you know, in specific about bisexuality and about the intersection of bisexuality and Mizrahiness. I'm not sure I have anything more to add, but I will say about Mizrahiness and queerness, specifically in Israel. One of the problems that we're facing a lot of the time is that queerness is perceived as Ashkenazi, meaning white Jewish, which is the dominant group here in Israel. And we do face a lot of racism, and part of that is the understanding of queerness as something that is inherently Ashkenazi, not Mizrahi, in a way that erases our identities and disallows us from wording and discussing, naming our own identities, creating a language for ourselves. For example, a few years ago, my friend, who is now gone, unfortunately, Danvig was her name. So Danvig and I created a flyer speaking against marriage in general. We posted it on the page of our anarchist queer group, Mashpritzot, which means sprinklers. It was shared in one of the Mizrahi groups by a very prominent person within Mizrahi discourse, saying, this is the most Ashkenazi thing I've ever seen. And Danvig and I were both Mizrahi. This is one example of a case where our discourse about ourselves is as being delegitimized as something belonging to Ashkenazis. The perception that our identities are unimaginable or incapable of existing, and there are several more examples of discourse of that kind in a way that doesn't leave a lot of space for us, which is also why I feel I'm a bit lacking in discourse specifically and in language to specifically describe bisexuality and Mizrahiness, because it is literally blocked from every direction. I think it's one more thing that we have to work on.
There's a lot of crossover between bisexuality and gender diversity, both in terms of activism and identities. What are your thoughts on this?
Oh, wow, there are a lot. I think in many ways, bisexual communities, and in many instances, bisexual communities form not just by communities, but by trans communities. For example, here in Israel or occupied Palestine, the Jewish bi community started out, it came out of the trans community in many ways. The groups and events that I started organizing back in 2008, 2009 were organized by myself and people that I knew, among other things, through trans communities. Back then, I think there wasn't as much space within trans communities to genderqueer people, here at least. So in many ways, our community became, a safe space for bi-genderqueer people, such as myself and many of my friends at the time. And I think this sort of thing happens a lot today too. So like I see a lot of non-binary people in bi groups online internationally. I see it happening in a lot of real life communities. On the other hand, I see a lot of cis communities who are transphobic, and I do see a lot of historical revisionism and denial of cissexism within bisexual communities, and the complete rejection of the suggestion that any bi person could ever have been transphobic in any way because it somehow, you know, hurts our reputation. I think these two things exist simultaneously, and the bisexual communities have a lot to talk about and to theorize and politicize around bi genderqueer or bi trans identities, but that cis bisexual have a lot of work to do in, you know, unlearning and deconstructing their own transphobia.
It's just, I guess off the back of that, how useful do you think it is to talk about monosexuals, so grouping gay, straight and lesbian folk?
This really brings me to you know, my most infamous term that I've coined, monosexual privilege, which is where I get the most backlash to the word monosexual, which I did not coin at all, of course, nor did I coin monosexism. I know that it's sometimes attributed to me. I talk about monosexism and monosexual privilege to put the spotlight on cishet people. This is, I mean, this is a bit of a sore spot because this is my most misinterpreted piece of theory ever. I think the word monosexuals is useful to us in speaking specifically about the axis of oppression against bisexuals by heterosexual institutions in society. And there is room to talk about gay and lesbian complicity, but definitely that word is not meant to be weaponized against gay and lesbian people. It is meant as a theoretical tool for us to theorize oppression, you know, out there, outside gay and lesbian communities and in the world, which, you know, we all seem to take for granted so much that we don't bother to speak about it. So that, I think, is the usefulness of monosexuals. And I mean, I know there are a lot of criticism against, you know, putting gays, lesbians, and heterosexuals on the same axis, but also, you know, every word about intersectionality in the language of intersectionality ends up placing oppressed and oppressor groups together. You know, if you say men, you're including all men. You're including, you know, trans men and disabled men and black men, men of color, of many and people of many marginalized groups. Or if you're saying, you know, abled, you're doing the same. If you're saying cis, you're doing the same. So I don't accept that particular critique, and I think the word monosexuals is still useful to us if we can reclaim the discourse and undo the backlash.
On a related note, what do you think the relationship is between monosexism and gatekeeping in queer communities?
Like I said, I think it's a connection of complicity. Gays and lesbians are sometimes very painfully complicit in maintaining, you know, the structures, the social structures that oppress bi people. and so, you know, you see things like social isolation, rejection from society, and lack of resources, and, you know, a lot of things that are resulting from this kind of isolation, like poor health and poor mental health, and, you know, many other things. And I think gays and lesbians have a lot to work on in terms of biphobia, and in terms of the wish to keep gay and lesbian spaces pure, as it were, especially in lesbian communities, where lesbianism is often constructed as purity of men, and by extension of bi women. Yeah, that's it.
So how important is something like bi-representation, so with celebrities or television shows, versus on-the-ground changes, so things like asylum seeker policy, or, as you mentioned, mental health programs for bi-plus folk?
I think both are important, but the issue of representation ends up taking center stage, which I think is the wrong choice for our communities. Obviously, you know, as we've also seen, you know, in the marriage equality movements, you know, LGBT movements do tend to take on the nicest and less difficult struggle, the one that wouldn't force us to deal with all the pain, violence, and difficulty enacted on our communities. So I think in a way the focus on bi-representation really reflects that. You know, our tendency to not want to engage with difficult subjects, but the place where our involvement, discourse, and awareness would be, you know, would do the most important work and be most vital is, of course, on the ground changes, things that, you know, that try to change and address the acute problems that many of us are suffering from. Things like poor mental health, suicidality, poor physical health, poverty, exposure to violence and sexual violence, PTSD, and, you know, a line of other problems that require, you know, urgent action and resources. So I think, you know, and representation is important to me. It's actually, you know, I do plan to write my next book about bisexuality on TV. But also I think a lot more attention should be given to the harsher issues.
On the back of the last question, how do we break past the apathy towards bi-plus issues, both from the broader community and from within the LGBTIQA+ communities?
I think first of all, we need to be speaking to the general cishet population, not within our own LGBT communities. We can't keep our discourses closed, and we can't aim them towards, you know, limited spaces and people who are not responsible for our oppression because their ability to do something about it is limited. I think also we need to change a lot of bisexual discourses. A lot of bisexual people still feel like bis don't suffer from a unique type of oppression. We suffer from homophobia or lesbophobia, or we're perceived as straight. even though statistics strongly suggest the contrary, that bisexual people suffer oppression regardless of the relationship they're in or how they present in public. I think we need to develop and expand our own language about our own oppression and to talk about it in broader forms.
That's some really awesome advice for those of us who are doing work in this space. And I'm sure there's lots of people who are watching this today or on Friday. So just to wrap up, Shiri, can you tell us about what projects you're working on now?
So right now I'm mostly working on writing. I haven't been able to do much for the past 4 years due to various personal crises. So I'm slowly getting back into it and starting to write and publish, both in Hebrew and in English. So right now I'm pitching an article about bi-misandry, talking about why bi women hate men so much, which I love. I absolutely love bi-misandry. The article is going to be all about how it helps us deal with heteropatriarchal oppression. There's also a myriad of projects that are waiting for after coronavirus. I want to start a mental health group for bi and queer people and trans people in our community. I don't say trans not because I'm forgetting. I'm not saying trans because I already include them in bi and queer. I want to do that. I want to do a series of panels. I was actually, you know, just as we were going into we're going into the second lockdown now here in Israel. So we have the biggest rate of new infections per capita right now when we're going into a second lockdown. Back before we were going into the first one, I actually already scheduled a panel about queerness and disability, which is you know, a discourse that is sorely lacking in many of our communities. It does exist in the academia here, but not in activist circles. I really wanted to do that intervention, and I still plan to. I want to do a panel about bisexuality and feminism, and bisexuality and polyamory, BDSM and feminism, BDSM and queerness. So I have so many things planned right now. They're just like on hold. And of course, you know, for the long run, I plan to write a book about bisexuality on TV. Gonna write it first as my MA thesis and then expand on it and publish it. I want to write a book about bisexuality and feminism, and to try and theorize what bi-feminism can look like. And I want to write, maybe I'll get to it, an activist guidebook for bi movements. So, you know, I have a lot of plans.
We want you to do all of those things, Shiri.
I want to do them too.
Yeah, looking forward to your many projects, probably 10 years worth at least. That'll keep you busy and us busy reading as well. Well, thank you very much for your time, Shiri. We really appreciate it. And we're very excited to be able to share this interview on Friday with our audience members. So it'll be an opportunity for readers to be reacquainted with your work perhaps, and to introduce others to your work and the ways in which bisexuality can be quite radical through your eyes. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That, thanks everyone for your attendance today. We want to send a sincere thank you to our special guests for helping to officially open the Stand By Us 2020 conference. Thank you again to Shiri Eisner, to Dr Vanessa Lee, to Commissioner Ro Allen, to all the BI+ activists and leaders across Australia and New Zealand. A special thank you to all the volunteers who have worked tirelessly to bring you 30 events over the next 9 days. We'd like to encourage you all to enjoy the conference and go to as many events as you can. Introduce yourself, look after yourselves, and please give us your feedback by contacting the conference organisers. You can get these details and the entire program at standbyus.com. So take care, enjoy, and have a happy Bi Visibility Month. And don't forget to do something special on Bi Visibility Day this coming Wednesday, the 23rd of September. From the Bi+ Collective, I'm Anthony Lekis, and enjoy the conference.
We have one more. Hi, Sally Goldner. We have one more announcement to make. And just I echo the comments coming through in the chat about Shiri's amazing address and the moving openings from Vanessa and the supportive opening from Ro. But we have, amongst the moving stuff, we have a bit of fun. It's long been, sort of plenty of evidence to assume a linkage between multigender attraction and punning. I think it's that bio-raising research that we never have actually had research on this. And in honour of that, during this entire conference, for the best spontaneous pun, there's going to be a prize, a $100 voucher to spend, and which you can spend online at Hares and Hyenas, Melbourne's queer bookshop. So just keep that in the back of your mind if you attend other sessions. Tell your friends, tell the people who don't like puns to be warned or something, and beware, B for bisexual, they're already starting, that there'll be plenty of them, and the judge's decision will be final and no correspondence will be entered into. And so yes, BIs are pun masters. They're already started. So we're going to have, amongst all the learning and the thoughtful stuff, there will be some pun and funs and fun and puns. So just from me as well, please everyone enjoy the next week or so and have a great time, and Bi fives.
Thanks everyone. Thank you so much for coming.